childhood development. Um, so I'll sort of give an introduction and the way that people frame it. Childhood development can it's about trying to find the study about the universal trends across human development and the different ages from childhood all the way up to older age and stuff. So things like development in the womb obviously is the starting place. There's an amazing video of like photos taken at different steps in the womb and stuff, and yeah, like the brain like starts growing at like day 2 or whatever, and you can kind of see this little baby's little fetus's brain. This is my first stream, guys. Apologies, but development, you can often find out how a child or how humans develop by looking at what goes wrong, and things can often go wrong in the womb that affects development later on in life. What they call them, I think, is tarcogens or whatever, which is a category given to things that might disrupt development in the womb, such as like smoking, drinking alcohol, certain medications can affect it. Even stress can affect the way that the child develops, and viruses. So, you know, back in the day, they didn't even know smoking affected childhood development or alcohol affected childhood development. You know, obviously there's fetal alcohol syndrome, and there's certain junctures of development of the fetus where smoking or drinking or certain stress and stuff might have a different impact based on when they do that on the development of the unborn child. So that's when you can start mapping the developmental psychology. So yeah, it's sort of that principle that you can kind of learn what works through failure, and that principle is sort of universal to life in general, which makes me feel a lot better about when I fail in life. So instead of going, oh no, I fucked up again, I should be like, now I have a better understanding of how it works. So you can turn that frown upside down and that suicidal thought around. Yeah, it's quite interesting that even stress can affect the development of a fetus. And you know what must be stressful? Being pregnant. I'm pretty sure morning sickness would be stressful. So that's sort of a risky situation, and not to mention the financial burden. And a lot of pregnancies are unplanned. You know, like, oh shit, I'm pregnant, I'm fucked. And then, you know, maybe the asshole guy that got them pregnant, or trans woman, let's be inclusive, got them pregnant, might not be around. So that might encourage the likelihood of the stress. So maybe almost every human being isn't developed in the way they should be because you had these disruptions of stress. But this is an overview. So I won't get into the guts of how stress develops, disrupts the development, but it does. What else do we have? Yeah, so obviously if you have a partner or a woman and you get pregnant, go in a bubble to avoid all these tarcogens. So obviously moving on, after you're born, unlike a lot of animals, like in nature, humans are more vulnerable offspring because our brains are so big, they take a much longer time to develop. And so, as opposed to say antelopes, where like you see those documentaries, the antelope's born and right away it's expected to like run away from predators, and it's able to walk and move and react to the environment. You know, basically the antelope mum just says to its kid, run and don't stop running. While humans are basically born, I've heard the term that it's like when humans are born, it's like still being a fetus because we're that undeveloped, which is quite interesting. So there's these critical formations of sort of neural pathways happen from sort of 1 to 3, that if you miss those junctures for development, let's say a child is put in an orphanage and it doesn't have the stimulation from its parent, it can miss these critical junctures in its development, and it'll never get that back. So there were examples of, I think it was Romania, where all these kids were put in orphanages because of a war and stuff, and so they were without the normal interactions that a baby or developing child would have with its family, and because it missed that, it actually, even though that they were then adopted by other, families that were, many of them were loving, they followed these children through adulthood, and they saw that many of these children weren't able to make up for that loss of critical development. So what would those development be? Things like emotional responses, emotional security, language abilities and stuff can all be affected. And just following on from that, some people just anecdotally that I've met in my life, the most fucked up people I know usually had troubled upbringing. So one girl I dated for almost 2 years, she had a thing called borderline personality disorder, which I didn't know about at the time. I wish I did. It would have saved me a lot of effort. But her mum, according to her, was quite abusive, where she'd go, "Oh, mum, I'm hungry," and her mum would be like, "Ugh," right, and punish her a lot, and belittle her and stuff, and not make her feel heard or responded to, and that made her very emotionally insecure. And she said that she used to do things like lie not on her bed in her room on her free time, but lie on the ground because she thought she deserved to be punished. And when this person grew up, they were incredibly emotionally volatile and weren't able to regulate their own emotions properly. Another anecdote or whatever is we know that people in Russia, for various reasons, they lived in a totalitarian society. It was a surveillance state. We know that, they got hammered really bad in World War II and stuff. And so the cliche is a lot of Russian people are quite cold and stuff. And that might echo through the generations as they have to detach from their emotions because of, I can't say what I think. I live in a totalitarian society all the morning from the wars and the famines and stuff. And my girlfriend said she went to her beautician appointment, and there was like a little kid with a Russian mom go, "Oh, mommy, I'm hungry," and the Russian mom was like, "Be quiet," which is in stark contrast to how mums in Australia might manage their children. Another thing anecdotally or whatever is my sister, although this was a bit older than those critical years of 1 to 3, we can still develop certain beliefs or whatever that might not be useful. So my sister never liked my mum's boyfriend Mel because she believed that when he came into the picture, so not her dad but the boyfriend of our mother, she believed that was the reason that mum was paying attention to her less because of this new partner, which is an incorrect belief because he wasn't around when I was young and she didn't pay attention to me, but she's made this false attributing to that. So we can kind of see what goes wrong through looking at cases of trauma and stuff. And so the way proper development's meant to happen is what psychologists are calling serve and return. So a child will kind of serve something. So by acknowledging a child has a mind, so the child might point at something or make a noise or play with a toy or whatever, that's a serve, and then you have to return that by sharing the focus, and that helps foster a child's sense of independence and warmth and security that allows for their healthy development and actually encourages their curiosity about the environment and helps them learn. So we think of learning, as the schooling system, the public system, but maybe more critical to that is the kind of learning they have with their parents, even before school. So one thing that governments in the medical system, they didn't sort of understand these processes or appreciate them in the 50s and 70s. You might remember videos where you see rows of chip babies lying in cots. So they basically they take the baby from the mum after birth and put it in this cot, probably to observe it to make sure it's still breathing, doesn't die, because it's easy to, resources to have them all in a room where you can see if one of them's choking or whatever. But they didn't appreciate the opportunity for both the baby and the mother to bond in that critical period, just after birth, and how important that might be. It's not the be all and all, but they underestimated how aware a baby's mind is even then. So at the time, without knowing it, by putting him in this thing away from their mum, perhaps the baby's instincts are going, "Oh, I've been abandoned, and a hawk's going to come eat me, or a wolf or whatever." The evolutionary systems that allowed us to adapt or whatever might trigger these stress responses in those children. So you're actually traumatizing these babies. And then obviously these kinds of insights about childhood development allowed psychologists to try to lobby the government to change those processes. And that shows the importance of these kinds of insights. What else do we have? So in terms of trying to understand, so as a thought experiment, imagine there's a kid, an 8-year-old, and every morning at 8:30 a.m. they chuck a tantrum. Now there might be 3 reasons why this is happening, and let me know what you think. Is it A, because their temperament is just genetically different and they do that? B, the way they were raised. So if their parents aren't very good at regulating their own emotions, and their parents have outbursts and are very aggressive or whatever, the child might model that behavior as the way that they deal with that emotion. Or C, is it something to do with the environment, like perhaps going to school? So obviously with Sigmund Freud, in previous eras, the focus used to be on sort of the way that the child is raised, and the cliche Sigmund Freud going, "Tell me about your mother," so I remember, just anecdotally or whatever, my mum used to have aggressive outbursts and stuff all the time, and screaming matches and stuff, and so that made me more prone as a young child to have these aggressive outbursts. I remember one incident, maybe when I was sort of 12, at a summer camp, with my best friend was there, and there were some older girls who were like, maybe 5 years older, approaching 20 or 16 or something, and one of them turned to her friend aggressively and just like had a go at her, like just kind of went from 0 to 10 in terms of aggression. And my friend at the time was like, "Oh, that's what you're like," and he kind of gave me something to reflect upon about my nature and stuff. So, the way that our parents raise us can affect how we internalize things. But since then, through genetics and stuff, we've actually been able to track genes that affect temperament and stuff. So there's more of an emphasis now on the biological, so that there is a more greater shift away from just seeing children as blank templates written in by their parents, to maybe having temperaments and stuff. Like potentially, it might be possible to have loving parents and the kid grows up to be highly aggressive due to their genes or whatever. But I would suggest that it's both, obviously, because more likely than not, if a kid has genes to have a certain kind of temperament in a certain way, where did they get their genes from? Those parents. So those parents who are aggressive, or maybe more prone to angry outbursts, those kids will actually inherit those genes. So it's kind of hard to determine. And then, of course, there's the other option of the environment. They don't like going to schools and stuff, so you can't simply model the behavior of nature or nurture. There could be something environmental that's outside of that. What else? Impacts on leisure. Some theories dominate. not bad. Sorry, I'm just looking at my lecture notes here. Bear with me. Cognitive development. So obviously siblings can have a massive impact on children or whatever. There's a thing in China right now because of the one child policy that you have a lot of parents putting a lot of focus just into one children for a generation, and so that child doesn't have siblings, so they haven't had to learn how to share or maybe learn boundaries and get over their egotism because they've got two parents who are focused in on them. So there was a video that my uni lecturer played that showed like two African kids, and they're like playing with like toys or whatever, and they seem approximately the same age, but obviously not identical, but around. They seem to be maybe 1.5 years old, and one of them just bit the other one because I don't know. That's what babies do. Just that they're crazy. They haven't learned empathy or whatever. They bite the other kid, and the other kid starts like crying, and then it like slaps the other one, and then the other one starts crying. Now this seems somewhat distressing to see. You know, no one wants to see kids hurt each other and cry and stuff, but you might speculate that potentially down the line, those kinds of interactions over a period of time would help those children kind of learn boundaries and learning to share space and navigate space and stuff. And even though you know these kind of vicious sibling rivalries could actually do the opposite and maybe make them more aggressive or feel left out or lack of control, depending on how intense that sibling rivalry is. But there might be a case to say that with the that they're not going to be as egotistical since they've had to share the attention of their parents and they've learned those boundaries by if I bite other people I get slapped as well. While maybe someone who's a single child might be more prone perhaps to go out into the world and bite people. And obviously I mean that metaphorically in the sense of being an entitled cunt. You know, like I'm sure we all think of examples of maybe the single child's perhaps someone who's more likely to cut in front of you in traffic and not wave because their siblings never bit them. Something to think about. And then there's also other things in developmental psychology about the environment you're born into. Like if you're born into an African tribe versus like in the West, they actually can see differences in the motor development. Even though both babies will end up growing up to walk or whatever if everything goes right, you will see that in Africa or whatever, the children will have better posture and stuff because they're encouraged and fostered to be more independent, while in the West, kids are more pushed on strollers and things like that. So kids don't have to use those posture muscles as much. And you can maybe see that's why being deprived of necessity to development can perhaps be part of some of the issues. We certainly know when it comes to immune systems that not being exposed to certain environmental stimuli will increase the likelihood of developing allergies because their immune system hasn't been exposed to fight off that because their environment was too clean. You could perhaps see that in terms of other roles, in terms of cognitive development, like having an environment where, again, back to that being a single child, you don't have to share, so maybe you don't develop those neurons as quickly. So that's just a brief introduction into childhood, into cognitive development, and I'll talk more about that in the future. I hope that was somewhat interesting. This was my first stream, and I'm still learning this, and I hope that I can become more interesting and engaging and have more diverging and interesting ideas and ways of articulating this stuff. Thank you.